Far from celebrating the new year, millions of Americans dread the arrival of 2016. More than 4 in 10 Americans say a terrorist attack is very likely to happen in the next few months. 7 in 10 Americans now call ISIL a major threat to US security. Americans are more fearful about the likelihood of another terrorist attack than at any time since the weeks after September the 11th, 2001, the date of America's most deadly attack in recent history. This fear has helped to lift presidential hopeful Donald Trump to a new high among Republican primary voters. According to Gallup, since the attacks in Paris and San Bernardino, California, Americans now fear terrorism above all else. Interestingly, Republicans are more likely than Democrats to say terrorism is the most important problem facing the US. At the same time, satisfaction with the way things are going in the US dropped significantly to a 13-month low in December, and public trust in the government to protect them from terrorism is the lowest Gallup has ever measured. Meanwhile, 1/5 of Americans fear a broken American economy as the key issue for 2016, while fear of gun violence has more than doubled. Who, if anyone in the US, benefits from fear of terrorism? Why has the US still not made its citizens feel financially secure? And will fear of gun crime rise even higher in 2016? These are the simple, if troubling, questions we sought to answer. Now, a recent study shows Americans fear terrorism in 2016 more than anything else, even though these are events they are least likely to ever experience. How do you account for this? That's what we asked the American public.
Because you see a lot of it still. So I think it's appropriate to be afraid.
God, it's because it's the masses that fuel the fear, and also sort of the political scheme, the way it is. It's so propagandized that it makes people think that at any moment this massive thing is going to happen to them, and so they're almost afraid to come out of their doors. But it's not.
I think it makes for a good news story when people can rally to be afraid of something that they can point a finger at, rather than maybe taking accountability for other things that are under their own control.
Well, it's the global position on it. It happens everywhere in the world, and it is happening more often.
I think fear is fear, and it's easy to push people and trigger them with fear. And I don't think that necessarily that's true for all Americans.
My personal feeling is it is not the biggest threat to us and our country. I think ignorance that is going around is. And I do believe that there are fearmongers, the Republican candidates, Fox News, and various other news outlets that are trying to build fear instead of focusing on the real issues we have in this country.
I think a lot of people fear because it's top of mind. That's always shown on the media and newspapers, so people are always thinking about it.
I'm not really sure. Personally, I'm not all that concerned about it. I think everyone kind of looks out for each other, and I think obviously right here we got plenty of security and everything, so it's not too much of a concern for us.
I play soccer, so most of my thoughts and efforts are focused on that, my family.
I just think that there's a lot of hype by politicians, by news media. It could happen anywhere, anytime. I think we're likely to be hit by a bus as much as we're likely to be hit by a terrorist. That's my personal opinion. But speaking on behalf of the country, everything you hear on the news channels would say that that's our biggest fear. It's not mine.
I don't agree with that. I do believe terrorism is one of the biggest fears in 2016. I mean, we've already lived through the World Trade Center. I'm an ex-New Yorker, so don't tell me it's not real.
Fear and fear-mongering.
Why is there a disproportionate concern about the terrorist threat compared to other dangers? We asked our experts.
Well, I think the survey which shows that the Americans fear terrorism more than anything else reflects the fact that since 9/11 we've had the constant, not just drip, but a torrent of propaganda blaming Muslims in particular in the Islamic world to justify the American war on terror in Iraq and elsewhere around the globe. And increasingly you have these people in America scared of what they see as being some sort of threat. This is epitomized by Donald Trump in his attempt to get the Republican nomination by talking about not just Muslims as being a threat, but Mexicans being a threat. The whole world seems to be a threat now to a large tranche of the population in the United States who are living in fear of these outside influences. And of course the irony is that they've never been outside of the United States of America, and they've probably never met a foreigner in many cases.
A survey shows that fear of terrorism is at its highest for over 10 years. Who, if anyone in the US, benefits from this fear? The public said this.
That's an interesting question. I don't know that one. I don't know.
Well, I think definitely politicians didn't benefit from it. It gives them something to debate about, to create a lot of rhetoric about. Also, gun makers have really profitized off of it because gun sales are higher than ever right now in the U.S.
Global companies, they use it to push their products, their, just global industry everywhere.
Oh, let's see. The banks, probably in some ways. It always goes back to the banks. It's a way of controlling people. It's a way of controlling the people. Taking away their civil liberties, turning people against other people, turning people against Americans that have been here their entire lives.
Nobody on earth benefits from this.
Who benefits? Next to no one. I think it's unfounded. I think the media gets more ratings, and that's about the only people that benefit from the fear.
Oh man, everybody does. Everybody, not only Americans, but any other nationality or ethnicity group that comes in our United States, they're pretty much protected.
I don't know. I try not to think about it. Yeah.
I think the terrorists benefit from the fear that they're creating. They're accomplishing their goal. And so if we would just live our lives as normal, be vigilant, be on the lookout, then we would have nothing to fear.
Absolutely nobody. This is just unacceptable, un-American, inappropriate, wrong.
I don't know who benefits from that fear. I can't imagine anybody does.
I think the government does in part because instead of us looking at what our government is doing, we're looking at what other agencies or other people outside of the U.S. are doing. So our attention has strayed away from the real problems that we have here in America.
Do our experts have an idea of who might benefit from a fear of terrorism? Here's what they said.
I think when you ask who would benefit from this fear of terrorism, the answer is the industrial military complex, which is a massive section of United States capitalism. Even as far back in the days of President Eisenhower in the 1950s, he was actually denouncing the US military industrial complex. And they have an interest in maintaining this constant level of tension and indeed chaos in the world in order to sell arms. And we see that in the Middle East currently, where not just the Americans using their own arms, but also lavishing arms in Saudi Arabia and other countries, Qatar and so on, and making a great deal of money from it. So they have an interest, and I think that there is also a propaganda element in it as well, which is really America is a place where the population is kept under very close observation, as in this country, as a consequence of what happened subsequent to 9/11.
Republicans are more likely than Democrats to say that terrorism is the most important problem facing the US. What perception does the public have of how these claims are put forward?
How does it manifest itself? They speak their mind. They speak truth. They see the world issues. They're not worried about climate change, stuff like that. That yes, it is a issue, but there's more behind terrorism than there is ice caps melting. They've proven that it is growing at this time.
Republicans tend to be a little more stronger in their approach to fighting terrorism. So I guess I believe that I would probably support them in that.
I'm not really sure how to answer that one.
Well, I mean, when you think about it, Republicans have a long historical record of scaring people. That's one of the ways that they maintain power, is they scare people into believing that, you know, everything is bad, everything is scary, and they perpetuate that myth that we have, you know, of being fearful of everyone else.
By word of mouth.
I really don't. I don't have an answer for that question.
Well, I think the Republicans are more willing to kind of beat on the drum for the military and everything. The Democrats are a little more focused on, you know, people and human rights. So, I mean, we all want to approach security in a way, but, you know, I think the Republicans like to drum up the fear factor.
So far, it's manifesting itself in a lot of fear-mongering and really awful rhetoric.
I agree with the Republicans. I think it is one of the biggest fears for the U.S., that and the economy. So, and I think that would damage the economy. I mean, if we have another attack, it's obviously going to cause economic chaos.
I think in group behavior, in group speak and group behavior, and group thinking, and maybe not delving as deeply into an issue or delving into an issue in the same in a limited area of information.
We asked our experts to outline the difference between how Republicans discuss the terrorist threat versus Democrats, who do not seem to express the same level of concern.
So usually what you see is that the more right-wing party is the one that essentially is more racist, more bigoted, and that's generally is a trend across the whole of the West. Now you have the Republicans who are open in terms of that rhetoric, but you also have the liberals, the Democrats, who have to be seen as an alternative. But when you look at the policies, really they're both pro-war, they both are essentially essentially intervention and all the things that the Republicans stand for. It's just another shade of colour, in fact.
The fact that Republicans think terrorism is the greatest threat is hardly a surprise. This is the party of George W. Bush. This is the party which went for the war in Afghanistan, they went for the war in Iraq. And all the Republican nominees for the presidency competing against each other are fighting on this territory. And therefore, if you're a Republican, added on to the general propaganda around the war on terror, you've also got your Republican politicians feeding this and feeding the idea there is a threat from the outside world. You also have to look at the demographics of the Republican support. It tends to be older and male, older male Americans. You know, so they are people who fear the world and in many ways have lost out in the world as technological change, the economy's changed. They're the ones who feel left behind in the United States of America today.
Shockingly, more than 1 in 5 Americans fear a broken American economy as the primary problem for 2016. Why has the US still not made its citizens feel financially secure? We asked the public.
Because we have a president that is only, he's so ideologically opposed to so many things to help the economy that he's basically having his own agenda. And whether it creates jobs or not, he's just going to do whatever he thinks is right.
Well, focusing on the wrong things, and I think pitting the economy versus other things like the environment, where we could make things work for both, and we don't.
It's kind of hard to do when our economics are driven on putting everybody into debt. You go to college, they push college on us. Everybody's hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. So it's a money program. It really is. They just want to keep us spending.
Well, I think part of that is the citizens' fault, because we're very greedy. I do a lot of traveling outside the U.S., and it's amazing when you go to some countries like that, the poverty that people live in, But that's kind of what's to be expected. And in America, we expect that we're going to have a $500,000, mansion, and we're going to have 3 cars and everything. And we kill ourselves to get that, and we put ourselves in debt. And I think it's our own fault that we have these issues. If we were a little bit more frugal and we didn't expect all these, lavish things, then our economy wouldn't be as bad as it is.
When everyone can have a job and have food on their table and a roof over their head.
Again, I'm going to say it's the right-wing news media doing this, because the fact is the stock market has gone up over 10,000 since Obama came in. We've had so many quarters of increases in jobs and improvements in the economy that they actually raised the interest rate for the first time. They're signaling to the world and to the Americans that our economy is actually quite healthy and improving. So I can't personally account for it other than they don't listen to facts.
I just think there's a lot of other unrest politically. There's not a unified sense of well-being in the United States between the two political parties, and each one throws out different verbiage that would cause the unrest, including their talks on the economy. But the reality of it is, if a person doesn't have money, then they're going to respond, as you just said. They're going to make that their number one fear or priority.
I'm not sure. I think that the economy is doing better, and I think that if there were not such a commitment to being sure that Obama didn't get credit for any progress, then I think that there would be a lot more celebrating and a lot more contentment than there is. But we're just in a very difficult political situation right now.
I think because the economy is still bad. I mean, there's still people without jobs. There's more people on assistance than ever, more people needing heating assistance, et cetera, et cetera. And, the other thing is healthcare expenses. My healthcare expenses, and I have coverage, are astronomical this year versus 2 years ago.
Why do so many Americans believe 2016 will be the year of a broken economy? Our experts explained.
So the reason why they're happy for the inequality to increase in America, simply because is that they can just palm off the excuses of it being immigrants or other issues like China or various other sort of things that will cause resentment to anybody. So because of the ignorance and because of the climate of fear, it's very easy to tell Americans, as it was during the slave trade, the reason why you're poor is not because of the slave masters, but simply because these people that look different from you.
I think the fact that a quarter of the American population fear a new crisis to the American economy underlines the fact that there are still huge problems in terms of the financial sector, in terms of rates of growth, which are 2-3%, which are way behind those of some other countries. I mean, even China, which is not doing as well as it did, is way beyond that. And the overwhelming fact that China is eclipsing America and may well have overtaken America as being the largest economy in the world. This has created a lot of insecurity in the United States, particularly, as I say, among that older male section of the population who were brought up in a world where America was number one, it was a dominant economy, and no one else could touch it. That change has been a traumatic change for that section of the American population. And 2008 and the financial crash was a major blow to the American population. They've suffered from that, and as a consequence, I think they fear that they may well be going into another recession, and I think they're right to fear that.
American fear of gun violence has more than doubled. Will this get even worse in 2016? Here's the public's prediction.
I think it will get worse because a lot of my family have already purchased guns. I think it's ludicrous. We live in fine neighborhoods and things like that, but I think it will get worse. Like every time we have another mass shooting or some other, terrorist activity that goes on, the fear magnifies.
I believe so, yes.
If we keep on the same path, I think so. I don't see it changing.
Not if people educate themselves on the proper use of firearms and how to protect themselves properly with them.
Oh, most definitely. I think it's going to get worse and worse over time. I believe that we should be able to bear arms. I own guns myself at home, but I think that we need to be smart about it. I think that we should have better laws in place for gun control. But I think that we just continually, it's become almost popular now to fear gun violence. It's kind of become like the in vogue thing.
That's a weird question. because there is that, and then there are people who are determined to keep the gun rights. That's a 10 answer question.
I don't think so. No, I don't think so.
Yes, I do believe that is finally kicking in. There have been a number of us who have been very concerned about gun violence over the years, and have seen it increase. And clearly, more people are dying of gun violence than are of terrorism or almost anything else in this country. But and I do think that people are finally realizing that it is a very serious issue.
Possibly. People feel more dangerous and, don't know what's going to happen. So, people think the solution is, hey, let me get a gun, be safe. But we'll see. Hopefully not.
I think so. Yeah, I do. Even though I'm for the privilege of carrying a gun and owning guns, if that's what America wants to do. But I just think it's just going to continue to be a fear. I don't know what the government will do. I hope that they don't create more fear by trying to take away the amendment, the Second Amendment rights. So
I hope that it's reached a point where we'll do something about it. I have no idea what will happen with the fear, but it really is past time to do something about gun control.
What is the expert view on the likely trend in terms of fear of gun violence in America in the year ahead?
Most definitely, yeah. I mean, as white supremacy increases, as it is in America, you'll see a lot more gun violence. You'll see a lot more, essentially, that culture of pro-guns and anti-guns really sort of clashing heads. It'll be interesting to see what happens in the dynamic of America, who exactly holds the balance of power and who advocates what narratives, especially once the political class. But, we are going to see a much more bloody America, just as we see America creating more of a bloody world.
I think the doubling of gun violence we've seen is going to get worse in 2017. It hardly seems a week goes by without some horrendous attack by some deranged person. And in fact, that they have any lunatic, any psychopath can get access to an assault rifle fairly easy in the United States of America. The problem is the Obama administration, as usual, lacks any decision in dealing with this. After any attack, there is always a wave of revulsion against the fact that guns are there and available. Obama has really failed to act on that revulsion, that genuine feeling of the American population, and face down the National Rifle Association, which is, after all, part essentially of the Republican coalition, so he's nothing to gain much there. But Obama lacks decision as over everything, like shutting down Guantanamo. And I think things will get worse until some US president is prepared to take action over the fact that not just weapons, but serious weapons like assault rifles are available across the counter in many parts of the United States. And when it comes to the part of the Constitution about the right to bear arms, we should remember this was written in the aftermath of the American War of Independence. It's not referring to teenagers being able to buy an assault rifle to massacre their classmates. It was about creating militias which had fought that war to defend the rights of those states. So it's not to do about that right when people cite on about it. So I think it's a crisis of leadership in the United States, and it requires a president who's prepared to face down the National Rifle Association and go for serious gun control.
The US public appeared deeply concerned that 2016 will be loaded with terrorism, gun violence and economic woes. These fears appear to provide favourable conditions for Republican warlords, weapons manufacturers and Islamophobes. Ironically, this also serves the cause of the very terrorists they dread. As one violent year ends and another year begins, it seems that far from wishing each other a happy new year, the public look towards an uncertain future and worry 2016 in America will be defined by unhappy new fears.